Freddie, did I ever mention the time I proposed to Ian Fleming that 007 ought to ditch the Walther PPK for a laser gun? Something with a bit more zap to it? He told me to get stuffed, so I gave him the Goldfinger and went merrily on my way. But now we're going to do a tutorial on disintegration. Engage Blender. Welcome to Blending with Algernon. I am your host, Sir Algernon, Blender Instructor Extraordinaire, and this is my faithful counterpart, Freddie. We will be working in Blender version 4.40. Clean canvas, please. As with all the best adventures, let's begin with a monkey head. We will also need an empty to control the disintegration effect. Freddie, let's make it a sphere empty, please. Thank you. Now let's start geonoodling. Split our view, and in the bottom half, switch over to the Geometry Nodes editor. To pull off our little trick, we first need a way to eliminate the object we intend to disintegrate. For this, we'll enlist the help of our empty sphere. But before that, we'll need to carve out a portion of the object itself, Boolean style. So, go ahead and create a mesh Boolean node. Then get a reference to our empty with an object info node. Within the node, set the reference to our empty. You could also just drag it in from our outliner, but I find this to be a much more respectable method. Our aim now is to create an object that can carry out the Boolean operation for us. To do this, we'll instance a new object and feed it all the parameters from our empty. This proxy approach gives us the flexibility to shape the effect however we like, be it a sphere, a cube, or, should the mood strike, a duck. As you can see, Freddie has taken the liberty of fashioning an icosphere as our object of choice. Using a transform geometry node, he's transferred all the parameters from our empty to the sphere. Once connected to the mesh Boolean node, our new geometry has successfully cleaved the monkey. A clean cut, if I do say so myself. As you can see, moving our empty cleaves the monkey accordingly. Tick hole tolerant for an even better cut. And for a smoother finish, let's increase the subdivisions on our icosphere to something around, 4. Yes, Freddie, our surgical precision is brilliant. Next up, particles. Let's create a distribute points on faces node and connect our Boolean node to the mesh input. We want particles to appear within our icosphere geometry, but only along the edge where we've carved our monkey. For this bit of sorcery, we will need a geometry proximity node. Let's make some room and connect the geometry from the transform geometry into the geometry proximity node. And then with a compare node set to a less than comparison, we can select the points along the edge. But we will need to adjust the threshold to something small, such as 0.003, so that we get just the points along the edge. Yes, perfect. Let's increase the density for more points. It's coming along, Freddie. Now on to our simulation. Make some room and create a simulation node. The objective with our simulation node is to conjure up additional particles as time ticks on. So best to stretch out the simulation space a bit. We're about to cram in a few nodes. First of which is the join geometry node. Plug our points into it and the output of the simulation to the group output. Now let's zoom in a bit and get the details in. Create a set position node and place it in the simulation space. While we're at it, let's boost the density even more. We will need to store the speed of each point as it iterates through our simulation. With each iteration, the simulation node will update the position of each point. So let's add a store named attribute node, set it to vector, and give it an appropriate name, such as speed. Before entering our simulation space, we will need to get a reference to the point speed and adjust. Create a named attribute node, set it to vector and the reference name to speed. Connect it to the offset on the set position node and to the value in the store named attribute node. A shift right click across our connections will tidy things up. Let's move that reroute node over a bit to make room for more maths. We need to do a little vector math to add the current position of the point and the normal direction of the face it's snuggled against. Add the vector math node and connect the named attribute node output and the normal output of the distribute points on faces node together. All right. Seems to be working, but we need to fine-tune it a bit. Let's normalize with another vector math node and set to normalize. If only life were as easy to normalize, right, Freddy? At some point, we will also want to scale it. So let's just duplicate our normalize node and set it to scale. Leave the default value for now. We'll also want a bit of randomness in our points movement, just to keep things lively. Add a random value node along with an index node and plug the index into the seed input. This ensures each point gets its own unique bit of chaos. Of course, we don't want things going completely off the rails, so let's keep the minimum and maximum values modest, shall we? A 0.001 to a 0.02 should do the trick. Plug the value in and hit play to see what we've got so far. No, that's not right. Freddy, you plugged the random value to the wrong node. We want it in the scale input, please. Yes, that's it. Our points are shooting out with a random scale from the normal faces. Excellent. Let's randomize even further by changing the seed on our distribute points on faces node with a scene time node. On a per frame basis should do the trick. Yes, I like it. I'd also like the points to become smaller as they shoot out. So let's adjust the radius of each point within our simulation. Let's start by setting an initial radius outside the simulation with a set radius node. Place it right after our distribute points on faces and set the value to 0.08. At the far end of our simulation, let's add another set radius node and apply some maths to it. Get a math node and a radius node and subtract a small amount from the current radius, say around a 0.002. Plug that value into the set radius node within the simulation and hit play. No, that's not right. Let's double check our values. I said 0.08, not 0.8. Freddy, have you forgotten to take your medication today? Yes, it's working, mostly. But once the points drift into negative radius territory, they start growing again. Why? Because the set radius node doesn't discriminate between positive and negative values. The solution? Simply delete the points once they dip below a certain threshold. Out of sight. Out of simulation. Create a delete geometry node and place it after our set radius node, then create a math node and set it to less than. Plug in the value of our adjusted radius and set the threshold to something small, such as 0.01. Plug the value into the selection input of the delete geometry node. Points with a radius below that threshold shall be clipped. Hit play and let's test. Working like a charm. That said, the points are rather on the large side. Perfectly fine while we're fine-tuning, of course, but let's bring the overall size down a notch. Add another set radius node at the very end and divide the radius by something sensible, say 15. That should keep things in proportion without causing a fuss. Lovely, very granular. Now, we need to inject a bit more motion into our points. Something with a touch of randomness, yet smooth and fluid. Enter the noise texture. Let's revisit our earlier random scaling and introduce some delightful chaos. Duplicate the vector add node, connect the output of the scale node to it, and then feed the result back into the previous add node, completing the circuit, as it were. Create a noise texture node and a scene time node. Set our noise texture to 4D and plug the seconds into the W input. This will update the W over time. However, every second is a bit much, so add a math node set to divide and divide the seconds by 2. We also want to adjust the output of the noise texture color a bit. Create another math node and set to subtract by 0.5 along the vector. This will keep things tidy. Finally, create another math node and set it to scale so we can globally scale our noise texture as needed. Let's start with a small value, say around 0.03. Plug the result into the add node we created earlier. Hit play and test. Good result, but a bit much. Let's reduce the scale on our noise texture. Perfect. Now let's bring back the object we are disintegrating, the monkey head. Do this by creating a join geometry node at the end, just before the group output node. Then grab the output of our mesh Boolean node at the start and connect to the join node. I love it. Let's adjust the final radius of our points in the divide node. Hit play and test. At this stage, it's really a matter of personal taste. If you fancy, you can drop in another math node just after the scene time node that feeds our noise texture. Set it to add and have a bit of a tinker. Adjust the values until you get something that tickles your fancy. And do keep in mind, all these values are fair game for tweaking. Tailor them to your heart's content. I think we're ready for some materials, Freddy. Let's go back to the end of our nodes and create a Set Materials node. In our Properties panel, select the Materials tab and create a new material. Set that new material in the Set Material nodes. Now let's switch over to the shader editor. Let's start with an emission shader and set the color to a nice blue. Hit the render view and... oh my, we have a blue monkey head. That's because both the points we created and the monkey head are using the same material. Easy fix. Create a second material in the Materials Property panel, then switch back to the Geometry Nodes editor. We need to create a new Set Materials node for the path leading from the Mesh Boolean node to the Join Geometry node. Set the material to the second one we created. Good. But we'll need some light to see everything. Create an area light and raise it above our monkey head. Set the shape of the light to a disk, increase the size, and set the power to around 1000 watts. Looking good, but I want to adjust the color on the points based on the radius of the point over time. So back in Geometry Nodes, let's capture the radius with a store-named attribute node. Duplicate the radius node and plug it into the store-name node. Give it a proper name, such as radius value, and we'll reference it from the shader editor. Switch back to the material for our points and delete the emission node, as we will be using the emission setting within the principled BSDF node. Get an attribute node and set it to radius value to get our reference. Create a color ramp, which we shall use to gradiate our color. However, the value of our radius will be quite small. Remember how we scaled down our points to get that granular look? So let's add a math node to bump up the radius factor. Multiply it by 100 and connect away. In the principled BSDF, select a nice blue for our emission color and connect the color ramp color to the strength. Also, connect the alpha to alpha so the points fade away as they become smaller. Back in the Geometry Node editor, let's scroll right to the end. There's really no reason our disintegration bits must remain humble points. They can be anything you fancy. Cubes, for instance. Simply add an Instance on Points node into the mix and connect a cube node to its instance input. Naturally, we'll need to tweak the sizes a bit, but you get the gist. And do remember to move the Set Material node after the instancing, so our particles keep their charming blue hue. Marvelous, Freddy. Marvelous. Last step is to animate our empty through the object to disintegrate to give it the full effect. Make sure the playhead is positioned at the moment you'd like the disintegration to begin. Then adjust the empty's position and scale it down slightly. Keyframe both its location and scale by pressing the I key. Next, move the playhead to the point where you want the object to be fully consumed. Shift the empty accordingly and scale it up, ensuring it fully envelops the object you're planning to disintegrate. Keyframe the location and scale. Hit play and test. Lovely disintegration. Now let's turn our attention to the lighting. Naturally, this will depend on your particular object and the nature of its disintegration. Also, tweaking the trajectory and speed of the empty can dramatically shift the mood. Anything from a slow, smoldering fade to a sudden, dramatic blip. It's entirely up to you, however the mood strikes. It should go without saying, but we are by no means limited to disintegrating monkey heads alone. This technique can be applied to any object you fancy. Simply drop the geometry node set up in the modifier stack onto your chosen model. Set its location and scale within the scene. Apply its location and scale with the Apply option under the Object drop-down, and then blast it to bits to your heart's content, whether it be monkey heads, bananas, chickens, or even Trump. The universe is yours to disintegrate. And that wraps up blending with Algernon. We do hope you've enjoyed the tutorial, and perhaps even picked up a trick or two along the way. If so, do consider sharing, liking, and subscribing. The working files for this session can be found via the link in the description. Until next time, happy blending. Freddy, send me the disintegrating Trump. I want to post that on my TikTok account.